You already know how this story is supposed to go. A home comes apart, and the child pays for it later. That part is not wrong. What almost everyone gets wrong is when the damage peaks. For 30 years, the research on this said two opposite things at once. And when somebody finally stacked all of it into one pile, the highest risk did not sit where the loss happened. It sat where the repair was supposed to be. In the next few minutes, you are going to find out which household arrangement carries the highest drinking risk for a teenager, and why it is almost nobody's first guess. Why losing a parent to death turns out to be gentler than gaining a new one. What actually happens inside a house that makes a 15-year-old reach for a bottle. And why people who study this argued about something so basic for 3 decades before anyone settled it. Every house runs on a rule book that nobody ever wrote down. What time the door locks, who waits up, who notices the smell on your jacket and decides whether to say anything about it. You never read that rule book. You absorbed it. And you could feel the exact week it changed. So here is the question this whole thing is built around. Which does more damage to a teenager? A parent who disappears, or a parent who gets replaced? Hold on to that one. The answer only makes sense once you understand what that unwritten rule book is actually doing. First, though, the size of the thing. Across Europe, more than 7 in 10 students have had alcohol at least once before they finish school. Close to half of them had their first drink by 13. That is the same year most kids get their first phone. Drinking is not a rare accident in adolescence. It is closer to a default setting. And adolescence is the worst possible moment for it. Your brain is still rewiring itself. Your body is rewriting its chemistry. You are working out who you are by testing what you can get away with. The first drink at that age is never just one drink. It predicts the shape of your drinking 20 years later. Which is why researchers keep circling back to the house you took it in. To measure any of this, you need a ruler, and they pick the plainest one available. They call it the intact family. 2 biological parents living under one roof with the kid. There is no judgment built into the word. It is just a baseline. Every other arrangement gets called non-intact and gets measured as a distance from that line. Here is where it gets strange. Put that question to the scientific literature, and for decades you got 2 different answers depending on which paper you happened to open. Some found that teenagers from split homes started earlier and drank harder. Others found nothing at all. No link. Same question, opposite answers, both published in serious journals. So which side had it wrong? Neither side did. They were measuring different things and calling them the same thing. One study counted a widowed father and a divorced mother in the same bucket. The next one kept them apart. One defined drinking as a sip at a wedding. Another is getting drunk every weekend. Line results like that up beside each other, and of course they fight. But the mess was hiding something. Buried inside all those contradictions was a ranking nobody had bothered to put in order. Start with the most obvious explanation and give it a name: the supervision gap. It is the plain arithmetic of how many adults are awake and paying attention on a Friday night. 2 parents means 2 people who might notice the missing bottle. 1 parent working a double shift means nobody notices until Monday. The gap has nothing to do with love. It is about coverage. And a gap never stays empty. When adults are not filling the space, friends do. The research keeps landing on the same chain of events. Less monitoring at home pushes a teenager toward their friends for the emotional things they are not getting indoors. Friends are where the drinking gets learned. And alcohol is simply easier to find in a house where nobody is tracking what is in the cupboard. You are already thinking it so. Let me say it out loud. Is this just money? A 1-parent household is far more likely to be a poor one, and poverty does plenty of damage to a child's health on its own. That objection is fair, and the people who work on this take it seriously. It is one of the reasons the answer took so long to arrive. But it does not survive what comes next. because long before anyone ran a single statistic on this, our culture had already picked its villain. Look at the word stepchild. It comes from an Old English root that meant bereaved. A stepchild was originally an orphan, and a stepparent was the adult who arrived afterward. Then the fairy tales did the rest. Cinderella, Snow White, Hansel and Gretel, centuries of stories pointing at the same figure standing in the same kitchen. Then the 20th century decided all of that was just superstition, and it had a point. The wicked stepmother is a slander against millions of people who did nothing but show up and try. Television handed us the opposite picture instead. A cheerful blended household where two families merge and everybody is fine by the closing credits. That is the one the numbers are about to complicate. If you enjoy watching quiet science overturn something everyone assumed was settled long ago, hit subscribe. We dig up a new one every week. Now back to the part that does not fit. If the harm came from losing a parent, then the worst outcome should show up where the loss is biggest. A parent who dies is gone permanently. There is no visitation. There is no second house at the weekend. Nothing about it is reversible. So why does that arrangement not top the list? The thing that does top it has a name too. Call it the second disruption. A new parent arriving does not undo the first upheaval in a household. It stacks another one on top of it. The family already reorganized once when it broke apart. Now it reorganized once when it broke apart. Now it reorganizes again around somebody who was not there for any of the history. The rulebook gets rewritten a second time by a person who never learned the old one. Picture it from the kid's side of the table. There is a new adult standing in your kitchen with firm opinions about your curfew and no history behind them. Every rule they enforce has to be argued from scratch because none of it was ever agreed with you. Meanwhile, the parent you have always had is now splitting attention with a partner. More adults in the house, less coverage of you. The arithmetic of the supervision gap runs the wrong way. Which brings us back to the question we opened with and still have not answered. Being left behind or being added to. On paper, the first sounds far worse. Every instinct you have says the same thing. Keep that instinct somewhere you can see it, because it is about to get tested. Timing matters as well, and not the way you would expect. When a separation lands on an older teenager, they often respond by stepping back from the family and looking outward for support. Friends. A partner. Anyone outside the house. That is a healthy instinct in almost any other context. It is also how spending the places where drinking happens. There is also the question of what a child is reacting to in the first place. The paperwork of a divorce, or the 2 years of shouting that came before it. Nobody has cleanly separated those two things, and it may not even be possible. A house can be legally intact and emotionally wrecked. The label on the family structure never sees that, which is exactly why anyone measuring this needs enormous numbers to see through the noise. And for years, nobody had those numbers in one place. Every team measured its own few thousand teenagers in its own country with its own definitions and published its own answer. The field kept arguing because the field kept staring at fragments. Somebody had to gather the fragments. Nobody had ever done it. Not once for this question. What happens when you finally stop arguing and put every study ever done on this into a single pile? That is exactly what the researchers behind this video finally went and did. And the pile turned out to be big enough to dissolve the disagreement completely. They pulled together nearly 60 separate studies spanning 3 decades and more than a dozen countries. The United States, France, Hong Kong, Slovakia, Australia, Greenland, close to 300,000 teenagers in total. For scale, the single biggest study in that pile followed about 50,000 kids and was considered enormous at the time. This was more than 5 times that. Here is the headline: Growing up outside a two-biological parent home raised the odds that a teenager was drinking at least once a month by about a quarter. A quarter is not a catastrophe. It is not nothing either. Think of it this way. For every 4 teenagers drinking in one kind of home, there were 5 in the other, small enough to argue about inside a single school. Impossible to miss across 300,000 of them. But that average was hiding the real story. Break it apart into the actual arrangements and they refused to line up in a neat row. Living with a single parent sat right around that quarter mark. Losing a parent to death pushed it up to roughly a third. Divorced parents landed almost exactly on top of that. And then one arrangement broke away from all the others. A stepparent in the house raised the odds by more than half. Read that ranking again because it says something uncomfortable. The highest risk in the entire analysis was not the home where a parent died. It was the home where a new one arrived. And down at the other end of the scale sat the arrangement our culture blames the loudest. Teenagers living with their mother alone came out closer to the two-parent baseline than any other group. Now the honest part, and it matters. Almost all of this comes from surveys that ask teenagers about their own drinking at a single moment in time. That kind of evidence can show you that 2 things travel together. It cannot show you that one causes the other. A stepparent does not pour anybody a drink. What the number is really tracking is a house in the middle of rearranging itself. And that might be the useful thing to carry out of all this. The risk does not seem to live in who is missing from a house. It lives in how recently the rules change and how many adults are still awake to enforce them. Loss is a wound, and wounds close over. A reorganization is a negotiation, and those run for years. Every family is a set of unwritten rules being tested by somebody who never agreed to them. The only question that matters is how many people are paying attention.